All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Shweta Shivkumar, a doctoral fellow at the Center for Wildlife Studies, and I'll be moderating this webinar. So Center for Wildlife Studies is a 37-year-old non-governmental organization that works in the areas of wildlife research, conservation, policy, and education. We have been conducting webinars called the Wildlife Chronicles. And this is the 25th episode of the Wildlife Chronicle webinar. These webinars span a range of topics from zoonotic diseases to species conservation of tigers. It can be lion-tailed macaques, elephants, and bioacoustics. And there are a range of interesting topics. These webinars actually these meetings used to actually happen at our Bangalore office. But due to the pandemic, it has given us the opportunity to conduct it at like a global scale and have a global audience. If you are interested in the work that Center for Wildlife Studies does, please do consider supporting our work. You can use this QR code to donate. You can also visit our website, cwsindia.org, or email our outreach team at outreach@cwsindia.org. With that, let's begin with this webinar. We're going to be talking about, wildlife research and policy and everything that connects the two. We have with us two esteemed guests today, Mr. Praveen Bhargav and Mr. Alok Prasanna. I would like to welcome the two of you to this webinar series. I'll be giving a short bio of the two of you. Mr. Alok Prasanna is the co-founder and lead of Vidhi Centre for Legal Policy in Karnataka. His areas of research include judicial reforms, constitutional law, urban development, and law and technology. He graduated with a BA LLB from the NALSAR University and a BCL from the University of Oxford. He has practiced in the Supreme Court and Delhi High Court from the chambers of Mr. Mohan Prasaran, and currently also co-hosts the Ganatantra podcast on IVM podcasts. He was instrumental in co-developing the manual with CWS on compensation policy addressing human-wildlife conflict in Karnataka. Welcome, Mr. Alok.
Thanks a lot, Shweta. It's my pleasure.
Mr. Praveen Bhargav, our other panelist, has been involved in wildlife conservation activities since 1982. He co-founded Wildlife First, a not-for-profit conservation organization, and serves as its managing trustee in a voluntary capacity. He has represented Wildlife First on the National Board for Wildlife, the highest advisory board on wildlife chaired by the Prime Minister. He was part of the subcommittee on amendments to the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. He presently serves as the member of the Enquiry Committee on Segur Elephant Corridor constituted by the Honorable Supreme Court of India. Among many, he is familiar with the Wildlife Protection Act, the Indian Forests Act, the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Act, and related rules, policies, and judgments of the Supreme Court and other wildlife or forest cases. Welcome, Praveen, to this webinar.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's just jump into the topic. I have a question to the two of you. I wanted to ask you if you can share your most memorable case that you have worked on with respect to wildlife research policy, any of that. We can start with Alok.
Yeah, thanks, Shweta. More than wildlife, and given that, I'm sure Praveen will have a much better set of examples to give. I want to talk about two cases where we converted research into policy, or rather research into law, in the sense that we just didn't sort of say that tweak the existing law, it introduced new laws. One was in the context of the bankruptcy code. When we were working, when I was working in the New Delhi office of Vidhi, there was a need felt that India's bankruptcy laws are outdated, it needs to change. And we started with the research saying how it should change, what should be the scope of the change, and so on. And we took that research to the government. It started off with an idea. That idea was translated into research. The research was translated into specific inputs. And those inputs were translated into law. That law was actually passed. Now it hasn't been in operation for so many years. Here at the state level, we presented the idea of a sandbox regulation to help startups try out their innovations in a better way. Again, the idea was presented by us to the government. The government liked it. Government said, why don't we turn this into a law? The law was passed. It is now being operationalized. We're helping the government also implement the law. These are memorable in the sense that in both instances, these were the first time legislation of this scale and this type were being undertaken, central level and at the state level. So one thing to keep in mind, and one revealing thing, was that change doesn't necessarily happen incrementally. It can sometimes happen in a dramatic shift. And that dramatic shift needs to be justified using solid data, needs to be justified using solid ideas and concepts put together and presented as, this is why it is in the national interest or the interest of the state to make this change. So I don't want to go into the very specifics of what we suggested and what we proposed, but since we are talking about converting policy research into research on wildlife into laws, let's just understand that wildlife is not absolutely unique in that respect. It is an area that the government sees these issues as the government. It is about sort of presenting the issue in a way that makes the government see that this is what is at stake, this is what needs to be done, backing it up with solid research. And most important for me was engaging with the government. Not just being the person who tells the government what is wrong, not just being the person who presents the solution, but being part of the solution. To be able to say, I will help you draft it, right? I know you may not take 100 out of 100 of what I'm saying, but even if you take 60 for me, okay, 60 out of 100, that is 60 more than what was there yesterday. And that's a change. And I will be willing to engage with you. I may disagree, but I will engage with you. So that is what it sort of takes. And I will elaborate on this as we course of our discussion. But I just want to put out these two ideas, two examples to show how a change in law was brought about and a change in policy was brought about on the basis of good, high quality research.
Thank you. Praveen?
Yeah, okay. So I'll give you another instance. This is particularly linked to a very major policy issue, which is compensatory afforestation. As many in the audience today would know, that there is a poorly researched idea that is currently prevalent in policy, which is that planting some trees somewhere is going to compensate for loss of pristine natural forests somewhere else. 30 years of the best science in landscape ecology is telling us that more than forest loss, it is forest fragmentation that a country like India should be very, very careful about. Because if we start breaking these forests into small bits and pieces through intrusions like highways, pipelines, power lines, etc., or even human settlements, we are going to lose biodiversity or wildlife or endangered species particularly. And planting these trees is no antidote to forest loss or fragmentation. So the process of lawmaking in this country is quite elaborate, as we will discuss. Both Alok and I will bring this up as we go along. The example that I want to give is about the Compensatory Afforestation Fund Act. A bill was introduced in the parliament, and it was the bill went to a parliamentary standing committee to review it, which is a normal process in lawmaking. So the parliamentary standing committee invited people, including people who are working in the field, to share their views on the bill. So the parliamentary standing committee also came to Bangalore, and I appeared before the parliamentary standing committee. And just before this meeting, coincidentally, an article co-authored by me had got published in the Hindu, an op-ed piece, sowing the seeds of disaster, saying that the same point, that planting trees is no antidote to forest loss. So one of the members of the parliamentary committee had brought that article along. And he said, look, you have challenged the very premise of this law. You have to justify before this committee on why you're saying this. I said, if you give me time, I will. He said, I'll give you 15 minutes. So I said what had to be said. And I said, this is going to be the biggest disaster that's going to play out. And I also provided a solution. I said, this Campa, which had already was about 50,000 crore rupees, I said that there are two important things. Campa is our sovereign fund. It is not like World Bank or JICA or any of these multilateral aid agencies giving money for plantation projects. They dictate the terms. This sovereign fund must be applied to consolidate large landscapes like the Western Ghats, etc. And there are huge opportunities. And the money must be used to for voluntary resettlement of people who are demanding resettlement from the interiors of protected areas outside. Thankfully, the second one got accepted. And because I could marshal all the evidence and the scientific information about the impact of fragmentation, the parliamentary committee got convinced to some extent, at least. And today, after the rules have been framed, there's a very clear rule to provide money for voluntary relocation of people from protected areas. But unfortunately, states are not doing it because it's not an activity that's quote unquote lucrative for them. So the bureaucracy looks at implementation of law as a completely different ballgame altogether. But at least we have something today on paper which will allow for consolidation of wildlife habitats. So this effort is an ongoing one, and we need to go on and on. Even in courts, gone are the days when one would take an Indian Express article and produce it in court, and lo and behold, you would get an order. It's going to be thrown out unless you go to court with solid information, data, after good research. Only then will your petition be heard properly. In fact, in the Major Forest Rights Act matter, we have produced so much of satellite imagery and time series analysis of what used to be forests in 2005, the cutoff dates, has been opened up subsequently, occupied, and rights have been granted. This is scientific evidence. So therefore, it is hugely important for all the young scientists in this audience today to understand that if their research should trigger change, they need to work at multiple levels and not just do their research in the field and publish a paper.
Yeah.
If I can just add one point to what Praveen also mentioned. Shweta, you just talked about the research that Vidhi has done with CWS on human-wildlife conflict. We have taken that research to court as well. There is a pending matter on human-wildlife conflict, and we are sort of presenting the research to court so that when the court issues directions or when the court sort of mandates certain certain measures to protect wildlife, they will take this material that we have produced before them to it. So, which is exactly what Praveen sort of mentioned. The research that you do is valuable. But it will have to be taken to court, to parliament, to the government, as the case may be.
Yeah. Thank you. I think you touched upon a lot of topics that we'll delve into deeper during this webinar. One being once you have evidence, what do you do with it, and how science-based is it, all of that. But my next question to you, Praveen, as a follow-up to what you were saying, so which law and policy do you think is most pertinent to wildlife researchers in contemporary times? You did mention Campa funds. But are there any more that you would like to touch upon briefly in this webinar?
Yeah, correct. No, actually, Campa law, I just gave an example. Right. The most important law that governs wildlife research is the Wildlife Protection Act. This is in place. It was enacted in 1972, amended several times, and the last amendment was in 2006. I was part of a subcommittee looking at further amendments. And one of the amendments that we strongly pushed for was the law being more accommodative and to facilitate good research, because there's a dearth of data on a wide variety of subjects. See, one must understand that the Wildlife Protection Act is a restrictive law. And it would be interesting for your audience to know that, for instance, there are different kinds of research. There's observational research, there is some behavioral research, but in some projects, you will require to capture animals to study them. So you're not killing the animal, but the definition of hunting in the Wildlife Act includes capture. So anybody who captures or even attempts to capture a wild animal, maybe it's for research, but the law doesn't differentiate. So without a permit, you cannot do that. You cannot even enter the national park or sanctuary, which could be a study area, without a proper permit. So, the authority who's empowered to grant these permits, research permits, is the Chief Wildlife Warden. Every state will have one Chief Wildlife Warden. That Chief Wildlife Warden is the statutory authority under the law to facilitate research grant permits. So young researchers, those who don't know, must be very, very clear. You can't just walk into a national park and start your research. You need all the permissions, and you need to, there will be various conditions imposed. There will be time restrictions. So if your research is on nocturnal animals or nocturnal species, you need to specify that in the application for permission, that you need to enter the forest at night and do what you want to do. And therefore, all these things, and as I already said, if you have to capture an animal, and in case of, see, the Wildlife Act has 4 schedules. Schedule 1 and Part 2 of Schedule 2 have the highest protection. So, but even in that, for research, there is a clause which specifies that if somebody has to capture a Schedule 1 animal for research, it will need the clearance not just of the Chief Wildlife Warden, but also of the central government under Section 12. So central government, there is a counterpart to the Chief Wildlife Warden in the central government. The statutory authority at that level is the Director of Wildlife Preservation, Government of India. So therefore, for research, you need to be aware of these basics of law, and the governing law with respect to wildlife areas is the Wildlife Protection Act. And please do follow. And of course, we have the Biodiversity Act, where, for instance, there are serious restrictions on collecting samples.
Right.
And also you need to inform the, of course, publishing a paper doesn't amount to transfer of IP or whatever. But other than that, if you're doing anything else and you have a foreign collaborator, even if it's a university, you need to take all necessary permissions. So it is a restrictive regime. Yes, it is a little difficult to get permissions, but then you need, it's something that all of you need to traverse to do research in this country.
Thank you for that. Then my next question is for Alok. I actually wanted to ask you, in India, is the development and implementation of policy in general, wildlife also, and law science-based? Is it science-based in India?
The short answer is no, in the sense that, let me put it this way. Whatever we've seen, science plays a role. I think Praveen just gave us an example where he talked about, in the context of the Campa, how sort of pointed out what are the problems with, and he made a good scientific argument. But politics is going to be involved. Science is not some field which exists in the pure ethereal air that is absolute facts, at the end of the day, the political system is what it is. We have to accept that reality. When we sort of say that, and even Praveen's example just sort of pointed, he gave two great suggestions on what to be done. One got kind of left behind, even though sounded scientifically researched, well based. But the second one, where you said, look, you can use this money to rehabilitate people, the political system understood the language. The political system understood, wait a minute, this is people whom I can tomorrow go shake hands with, say, I did something good for you, I built this for you, I built that for you. You can say, please vote for me or please give me credit. So in that sense, science has to be tempered with a little bit of humility about the fact that you're working with a very complex governance mechanism. And the governance mechanism sees issues not in terms of whether this is good science I can translate into policy. The governance mechanism sees, how do I make policy to serve the needs of the people who can then sort of keep me in power or keep me in positions and so on and so forth. So it's a machine which, if you have to put it that way, the way the machine thinks and sees the world is not the same way which, say, a scientist or a researcher would. As a scientist or a researcher, you are held by the rigor of your methods. You are held to the rigor of your peers. You are focused on ensuring that you get it right on the basis of your methods and so on. That is what your role as a scientist is. But translating that research into policy change, into legal change, requires you to take a fresh look at all of this. It's to take a fresh look and to sort of be able to present the research in a different way, right? And that is what makes for, again, your science will still be used, but if you present it only as, here is science, now translate. And to be very honest, we are living through a live example of this. We are living through a live example of this, because whenever we talk about vaccines, everybody says, just stick to the science, just stick to the science. Science is not something that, it's magic. It's not as if you do X, you get Y, and therefore Z is what results. There is so much also about how do you communicate your results to the public? How do you ensure that you talk about it in a manner that makes sense to them? And how do you talk to the political establishment so that they buy into your ideas? Right? See, it will be very dangerous for science to present itself as this last word on certainty. It's not. Think of all we have learned about the vaccines and even about the coronavirus and COVID-19 in the last 18 months or so. So much of what we thought was very true turned out not to be true. So much of what we were not sure of turned out actually this is what exactly happens. And we are learning on a constant basis. What makes science science is the method, and the fact that you have the humility to say at some level that this is what the method has said, therefore it is probably right. Not to say that believe science, right? So yeah. if your science may be good, the research is fantastic, but if you want to translate it into impact in terms of changing law and policy, you will have to relook as to how do I communicate this to the right person? How do I communicate it in a way that it sort of matches the language that the system uses to understand the world around, right? And that is also about having that humility to look at your own research and say, how do I sort of understand my results in a manner where I can say this is the change that is needed, right? In the sense, how do I put my work out there so that people take it up and say this is what needs to happen? So in that sense, I would sort of say that if you go with this is science, do it approach, you will fail. But if you take a look at the science, take a look at how the government approaches issues and understands issues, and find a way to merge the two so that you're communicating your work to the government in a language that they understand and giving them the work that makes their life more easier or their work better, you will definitely translate your science into action.
I think that's a very important point about looking at your own research with fresh eyes. Sometimes you're not capable of doing that yourself, right? You definitely need maybe someone else who can look at your research and say, what is, like, please translate it properly. Yes. That brings me to the next question to Praveen, which is, are there any laws or policies in wildlife which are either ambiguous or unclear and sort of need some backing of research data to aid in implementation?
See, there are a lot of gaps in the law, but broadly speaking, the Wildlife Protection Act is a fairly good law, which is enough to protect habitats.
Okay.
However, the problem is with respect to how all this translates on the ground. One illustration that I would like to provide to all the people here on the group. For instance, today what has happened, and I'm linking it again to Campa, the 50,000 crore rupees have been released to states for a variety of things that can be done. What this has triggered on the ground is something which is very shocking. That bulldozers and excavators, etc., are running amok in protected areas, digging that trench, creating that water hole, removing lantana. And science is very clearly telling us that lantana cannot be removed or eliminated by physical removal. The last word of the scientists is still not out. But then it brings cascading impacts. So what is happening is, one of the things that the law mandates is that every national park, sanctuary, or tiger reserve has to be managed according to an approved management plan or a tiger conservation plan, as the case. Now, what is happening is, all the science that is happening in the country is not infiltrating, probably infiltrating is the wrong term, is not getting into these plans. Why? A, because bureaucrats who are in charge of this, creating this plan, are not involving independent scientists and researchers and getting their inputs. B, this is not being, the management plans are not being peer reviewed. It is not even put out in the public domain. And in the same park where you have compelling data that you have gathered from your research, it won't be very surprising if that doesn't get into the management plan. So coming back to the subject of management and lack of science in management plans, let's take the case of entry of bulldozers and earth-moving equipment. I'm giving a very specific example. Now, many in the audience today will know the impact when a bulldozer rolls into a fragile wildlife habitat. There are reptiles, amphibians, there are ground nesting birds, etc., all of which will be in jeopardy. And why should we humans go in and interfere and tinker with nature when we hardly know anything? But these are lucrative works. Now, when challenged in court, a question cropped up saying, under which provision of the Wildlife Act is it stated that bulldozers and excavators cannot enter a national park?
Right.
Now, if you ask me, there is no specific provision like Section 32 of the Act prohibits the entry of bulldozers. No, it is not. It is implied. And therefore, you need to understand the law. And sometimes what happens is that the research that you do, if it creeps into wildlife, the management plans and tiger conservation plans, and at that level, if you have ensured that all habitat improvement works will be done without the use of excavators and bulldozers, because scientific research is telling us that entry and the rolling in of bulldozers, etc., is going to trample upon regenerating vegetation, is going to crush ground nests of birds. It's going to destroy the burrows of reptiles. It's going to affect amphibians, so on and so forth. So then what happens is that if it is not as per the management plan, then that would be a violation of the law.
Right.
So therefore, research must try to impact management plans and tiger conservation plans. I know, and I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago that forest officers don't want to entertain your research. So you also have to wear the hat of an activist or align with a advocacy group, share your research and say, hey, look, I've been working for 8 years on this species and I'm seeing what rangers are doing on the ground. Can you please take this up? Here's my data. Here's my. Otherwise, what happens? The research that you do will sit on the in the filing cabinet.
Yeah.
It will gather dust.
Yeah.
It will not infiltrate. Again, I use the term infiltrate. I don't know why I'm using that term. I think it is appropriate because you need to really infiltrate, like some of these journalists get embedded in special units and try to do a story, you know. So you need to do that. Lantana is another case in point. There are many, many examples. So the short point which I want to convey is that researchers must be acutely aware that their research, of course, we'll come to the subject of what kind of research later. I think there'll be a question on that. But should be aware where exactly would the research bring real change. And one of the things is the management plans and tiger conservation plan. In fact, if you form a small group on your own, do a peer review of all these things. In fact, it was done in the case of Dibang project. The EIA reports that based on which the project got permission, alumni of the MSc program took it up. They consulted me also, and they did a fantastic critique, scientific critique of that EIA, ripped it apart, showed how incorrect facts were, and that was very useful to the advocacy group. Similarly, it's happening in Goa on some of the projects, and I'm kind of linked to that. So therefore, young scientists, young biologists can do all this, trying to pick up management plans, study it, and ensure that the defects are pointed out and is shared with, put out in public domain. Of course, don't jeopardize your permits, because sometimes forest departments can hit back by withdrawing your permit, doing all that. So there are ways and means. I don't think this webinar is the forum to discuss that. There are ways and means of handling all those things. We all have a lot of gray hair to share with people the tricks of the trade. So get involved, and we'll come to what kind of research helps later.
Thanks, Praveen. I think as a wildlife researcher, we always hope that someone will pick up our research and sort of think that it is brilliant, it's going to implement. I think both of you have made that point that that's
No.
going to happen.
It'll definitely get published. It'll sit in the journal. No decision maker, no politician, or even the chief wildlife warden is going to look at it. No MLA or MP is going to look at it. You may even send it to the parliament library and the legislature libraries. It'll sit there. The only thing is you must take it and go and share it. If you have time, I can in 1 minute or 2 minutes, I can explain how we did it. In Kudremukh, the background that you're seeing, when we were fighting it, Jagdish Krishnaswamy, one of India's most respected ecological hydrologists, came and took some secondary data which government had put out, WRDO. And he came up with a very simple analysis which said 4% of the upper catchment of the Bhadra River is contributing 60% of the total siltation in the river and reservoir. Now, this would have remained on paper.
Yeah.
We took Jagdish along, went to the water resources minister. Jagdish had difficulty getting into Vidhan Saudha also. So we had to pull him in, all that. There's no time for explaining all those things, but in lighter way. And the moment he said his opening words, The minister said, stop. Jagdish thought, over. Today we'll get hammered. He said, the minister then said, which was music to Jagdish's ears, that this kind of analysis, none of my entire officers in the department have given. Can you please wait for 15, 20 minutes? I'll get everybody into the room. Everybody at one call were inside in the room. Jagdish continued his presentation. And the minister said, I'll sanction money. Please go ahead and complete your research. I'll give you all the permissions. He said, we don't want the money. The research was done. And the last point I want to make is that research was presented in the Supreme Court, and it greatly helped in stoppage of mining in Kudremukh. So you need to go. And if you don't want to go with advocacy groups. They'll set up meetings. I took Jagdish to this rally for rivers and met Sadhguru Vasudev. And we critiqued his whole approach. We said planting trees is not going to save rivers. I can go on and on, but
yeah,
let me stop there. So you need to be proactive.
Yeah. I think taking a step from that inspirational implementation part of it, I want to also ask Alok this question about how the scientific community and interested public can participate in the development of policy, like the development process. How can we participate?
Sure. And I think Praveen has already given a lot of this particular answer. But to me, there is no replacement for legwork. You have to patiently, I've done this. You have to patiently sit, wait for them to give you the time, knock on doors. You may only get half an hour, and how effectively you use that half an hour. I think Praveen does give us a great example of that. It's not just about if you have one bad meeting, it's the end of the day. I can give at least 2 examples where the first time we spoke to a given government officer on an issue, they were like, okay, what you're doing sounds interesting, come back later. Now we could have said, okay, nothing is going to happen with this fellow. Let's not go back to him at all. But once we completed our research, once we had something concrete to take to them to say, here's what we think you can do with this, and here's how we think we can help you, they were blown away. Next thing we know, they're like, please help us on this, please help us on that. 30 different things they're working with them. The thing is that it needed that legwork. It needed for us to go, wait patiently, talk to them about it, make them aware this is what we're doing. You may meet with dismissal at first, but the important thing is not to sort of get disheartened or lose sight. See, there are 3 very broad things that, at least from our experience at Vidhi, we worked on multiple areas, and I don't fundamentally see wildlife being fundamentally different. One is that you have to communicate to the public. Before you get anywhere near the government, you have to communicate your ideas to the public, because that way you will automatically do one thing that Praveen just mentioned, which is you'll be able to find like-minded people. When I sort of write an article on something, I'll get an email from someone saying, I'm researching on this area. This is so interesting. Can I help you with this? And there have been multiple things which have happened as a result of it. A lot of our collaborations have happened because we've put our work out in public, not just on a website or on a journal, but simplify it down to an 800-word op-ed for a Deccan Herald or a Times of India. So when somebody opens the newspaper, they see, oh, somebody's talking about this issue. I had some vague idea of it, but here is someone explaining it so clearly, so well thought of. That public part of it is absolutely necessary. The second part of it is government engagement, right? And that government engagement is what I just mentioned, that legwork, to go out there, to knock on those doors, to say, this is what I think should be done. This is what needs to be done. This is how I want it. And the third part is staying the course, because you will get an entry. Because if your research is good, if you have something to say that no one else has sort of said before, you will get that foot in the door. But at some level, you will be expected to stay the course for 2 to 3 years, right? Because just to give the example which I spoke about earlier in the talk today, we gave our initial idea for a regulatory sandbox in 2018. Okay, we had a draft law ready in 3 months from after that. Since 3 months after the government said This sounds like a great idea. You and I we will all know Karnataka had 1, 2, 3 chief ministers since we're on our 4th. Okay. Karnataka has had 1, 2, 3 governments since, right? No, still the 3rd government, say a 4th chief minister. But we had to stay the course. We knew that, okay, it's not as if we are in control of that situation. They said that they'll do it. We have to be patient for it. But when they when they reach out to you and say, we need your help on this to make it happen, we have to be ready to respond. We have to be ready to say, yes, here goes. So it took 3 years. It took 3 years to come to fruition. And that 3rd part of it, to be able to stay engaged with government. I always use this term, skin in the game. For people in government, we may not necessarily see it that way. For people in government, being able to show that I executed this program, to be able to show I initiated this program, to be able to show that here is how people benefited from this. That's a matter of job for them. That's a matter of continuing to stay in the job if you're an MLA or an MP or a minister or whoever you are. For them, this is not about feeling good. For them, this is whether I continue to be in my line of work or not. So which is where you have to show, I am as invested in this as you. I am as invested. I have skin in the game. I will put myself out there and I will give this commitment to time. I mean, 2 or 3 years doesn't necessarily mean every day of those 2 or 3 years. It means that you will not let this drop while you say, go ahead for another research project, or that you will, move on to something else in life. It is that being in that policies, in that circle where the government starts seeing you as essentially an expert, we have to consult. We have to speak to this person. We've had this experience in the context of the judiciary. And if you think dealing with the government is difficult, try the judiciary. And I don't mean like going to court and filing a case. I'm saying, telling the judiciary that the way you function is not efficient. You can improve things. Here are the ways to improve it. We did all the research, solid data-driven research. We couldn't get a meeting for 3-4 years. But once we got that foot in the door, now they just don't stop calling us, right? I mean, this is a little bit of humble brag, but they will automatically think of us when they say, okay, we need to do something about e-courts. We need to do something about online hearings. We need to do something about code infrastructure. Let's call Vidhi because they've done the research on this. But you have to stay invested in it. That is the point, because when you say, I have skin in the game, I will dedicate my time and my energy and my resources for it, you will be seen as someone worth engaging with. So communicate with the public, engage with the government, but most importantly, stay invested in the process. And after a point of time, you will be considered such an insider that they will start coming to you to say, hey, we're doing something, please come and help us. Or, hey, we want to do this, we wanted to consult you on this. So that is how I sort of see this happening for researchers.
I think when you
just to add, Shweta, sorry, just to add to what Alok said, there's a new area which is, you now have psephologists. Look at poll strategies. Look at the way the back-end offices crunch data. So the politician, everybody is wanting such people.
Yep.
Prashant Kishore is in great demand because he has won elections for you, or at least he has the what shall I say, insights to swing it, not by illegal methods. It used to be the case earlier when muscle power would prevail. I'm not talking of that, but look at Bengal, which played out in front of us. So therefore, as Alok was saying, that once they know that you have some material and that knowledge can drive change, they would want. And last point I want to make is, amongst all of us in the middle class in society, we have this kind of pathological hatred towards political leaders. But believe you me, if you work with them, and once they are convinced, they will go and do it. And a politician has to get elected every 5 years. Approach them when they are out of power.
Yes.
Build your relationship. Don't go with a personal issue. Take them to your research site when they're out of power. There'll be no cars in front of their house. The cell phones will fall silent, everything. At that time, they would want. So a group of young researchers going there saying, sir, please come. You can take a look at this. This is what it's going to do to a river, so on and so forth. They'll spend time. And then what happens is once that person comes to power, you have an entry and you can really go. And if you go for a genuine public issue, they will give you time. They will give you time. But the moment you take a personal issue, that relationship is gone. So be very careful to draw. There are red lines when you deal with people in power. Take public issues boldly. It is your constitutional right to do that. Don't feel sheepish or shy about it. Because I can't and Alok can't talk about the full bandwidth of constitutional rights that exist for every scientist. But the short point is that go to them, build relationship, and you will see results. It takes time.
I think I have a lot of questions prepared for the two of you, but we're slightly running out of time. So we're going to take questions from the audience.
Can I make one point before we get to questions?
Yeah, sure.
My appeal to everybody is as follows. In science, you can choose a variety of subjects for your research. There are a lot of research is happening on population estimation. A lot of research is happening on habitats. But the real data that is lacking today is human impacts on wildlife. If I were to give you a piece of data that people think that it is the general perception among decision makers and many activists, including environmentalists, is that, oh, it is corporate India that is causing huge impacts, whether it's mining or development, etc. But people are harmoniously coexisting. And therefore, there's no impact at all. When you look at data, it is not supported by data. I give you a fact that between 1980 and 2016, a question in the parliament was answered, which said that between 1980 and 2016, 6.5 lakh hectares have been diverted for various development projects. Just between 2008 and 2018, do you know that 72 lakh hectares of forest land have been converted to individual and community rights? Now you will jump on me and say, oh, community rights. No, that doesn't affect forests. Fair enough. Let's take individual rights. You're establishing private ownership over government land. It is 18.5 lakh hectares. So where is 6 lakhs? Where is 18 lakhs? And the science of it is that everybody talks in academia about fragmentation. I come back to that subject because that's the most serious thing that is facing us today. Even whether it is for the urban rich or the rural poor, or we are not, this is not a class struggle. Let's not dumb it down to that. And this is not a binary between this and livelihood and this. There are very many different ways of securing livelihoods and social justice for people. Not just grants of 2 acres. If you are fencing for a small agricultural land and you can't grow because you have, as Alok was mentioning about conflict, you mean to say in the middle of Nagarhole with 1,000 elephants and 60 tigers and whatnot, you're going to raise a crop? It's not going to happen. So it's a lose-lose for both people and wildlife. So we need to understand this, and it's all there, but there is so little data. There's so much of data that anthropologists and social scientists are collecting, trying to justify that people and wildlife can harmoniously coexist. But there's hardly anything on the wildlife front. There's nobody is focusing on that. So the point I want to make is applied research is hugely important to drive policy change and make certain course corrections at the right time. And there is, I must say, a real dearth of data on those aspects.
Thank you, Praveen. I think we were supposed to touch upon this quite extensively, but then we sort of ran out of time. So I'm going to address the first question to you, Alok, from the audience. Is it mandatory for government departments to make mandatory disclosures on such data, which is research, where public money is involved?
See, look at the RTI Act. If you look at the RTI Act, the mandate for the government is to disclose all information unless it's for some reason prohibited under the RTI. Unfortunately, everybody thinks of the RTI Act as just go to government, file an application and get information. All of this information is supposed to be made public. All of this information is supposed to be put out there in the public domain. Unfortunately, the government is slow about these things, or sometimes when it does it, it puts it out in some random corner of some website that nobody even knows about. You can Google it. Even if you Google, you don't end up finding, unless you know the nook and cranny of every single aspect of it, you won't find out. I would say it's not just enough to mandate it. It's about also having the infrastructure to do it. And I think it would be great if researchers can come together and say, look, this is the kind of data that is very important. Put it out on a platform. We have data.gov.in. We have a lot of other resources that trying to collate data that the government has, so that researchers and others can go into one single place. But can we sort of create a platform where, irrespective of the department, say maybe one for the state, one for the central government, can we create a platform where this data is put, so that you don't have to go looking for this department, you don't have to go looking for that department? Because if we've done the research for the law ministry, we've given them all of it. They said, yeah, we'll put it up on the website. We had to follow up to say, can you please put it up on the website? Because I know you've paid us for this research, but it's our work. We want to share it with people. So in a sense, I think the solution cannot just be about mandating, but also helping create some sort of an infrastructure where this data can be accessed.
Right. Yeah. Also, one follow-up question is, do students need a legal degree to be involved in policy development and implementation?
Absolutely not.
No.
Because even at Vidhi, for instance, even though it was set up by lawyers, and it literally says legal policy, a few and a growing number of our researchers are non-lawyers. So for instance, our work on environment is led by an engineer and turned environmentalist, Debaditya Sinha. Our work on education is led by an economist who looks at issues of childhood education and so on. So yes, there are a lot of non-lawyers. In fact, I'm really grateful that someone is saying if a law degree is necessary, because 10 years ago, people said, is an economics degree necessary for this? I'm glad that we're pushing back against that idea. But no, to be very honest, this is something that all of us learned as we did this. And it's really more, of course, some suggestions may require legal inputs. If you want to change a law or a legal framework or something, yes, you will need to involve lawyers, because that particular solution needs to fit within our legal and constitutional framework. You need some sort of a legal input. But the task that I described, writing for the public, knocking on doors, and literally being ready to be engaged, that is up to anyone to do. And that is more of like being willing to learn and willing to do all of this work. Doesn't necessarily come naturally to lawyers or anything like that. At least for me, I learned all of this much later in life. On the job, I learned all of this. So yeah, I would say it's not necessary. You may need legal input at some point. Do look for a lawyer who might help you on that, but all other work you can do on your own.
I think our audience has been very inspired by both of you. So they want to know how to reach both of you on various platforms.
Oh, okay. I think if you can just share our email addresses, or at least my email address, I'd be very happy to answer inquiries.
Yeah.
Email address. Praveen? Okay.
Yeah.
Email address would be fine.
Yes.
Okay. We'll share it with the audience. We have them on our mailing list, so we'll be sharing that with them. I think if to the people who are listening, can you just tell your email address out so that they can write it down?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Or I'll do one better. I'll sort of share it on the screen if it is kind of clear. Or is it turned around? Sorry,
Little bit blurred.
Is this better?
No.
It's a long email. All right, I'll put it in chat. I'll just put it in the chat.
Yeah, you can put it on chat and then
easier.
people can, yes.
Yes.
My email address is quite simple. It's wildlife first, one word, wildlife first @gmail.com.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I have one question for the two of you. Do you have any sense of like when you're working in this field, is there any sense of reward that you feel, any memorable incident where you felt like sense of reward being involved in advocacy, policy implementation, development, any of that, like as a closing remark?
Praveen?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Alok.
No, I was going to ask you if you would want to go.
Okay. Yeah, there are many moments. See, when you get into public policy and the public space, please be aware that you will have to come out of your comfort zones. You will be open to criticism. People will cook up stories. You need to take that. That's part of the game. So, but then the reward is nothing but satisfaction of saving landscapes and species. Now, the Kudremukh battle was, we went through a lot. If I were to share with some who are in the audience today, no, the forest department hit back. I don't know what happened. The mining company was involved. There were 14 criminal cases filed against us, spread over 4 courts in 3 districts. So that we just keep running around for bail and not monitor the closure of the winding up as ordered by the court. Now, these are things that you need to face. But then we had so many allies, so many people supported us. And some of the top lawyers supported us. Some of them did it pro bono. And of course, the High Court came down heavily on that particular officer who was trying to do it. So these are things which you will face, but the rewards certainly are there. What more satisfaction do you need than having contributed in a small way to saving 3 rivers, which is far bigger, the water regime of Bhadra, Tunga and Tungabhadra and Netravati are far bigger than Kaveri. And there's a little known intervention that we did. We went to the Supreme Court way back in 2000. And we said that a lot of removal of trees is happening within protected areas. This is not permissible under the law. On 14th February 2000, the Supreme Court said no removal of dead, dying trees, including grass from any national park or sanctuary across the country.
Yeah.
And as we speak today on 26th of August 2021, that order is still in force. And today I can say with some satisfaction that some forest officers now have forgotten the method of felling. The felling hammers have rusted probably. So that's the reward. And what bigger reward than that? So you will certainly have your rewards. You will have very, very satisfying moments. But like life, you will face adversity. And you must be prepared for that.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Thanks. I'll just add one small thing to Praveen's comment. And this is from a slightly different perspective. For me, perhaps the most rewarding experience of my professional life came when I was asked to judge this competition, which happens once every 2 years between urban local bodies in Karnataka, to see which have come up with the best measure for improving the welfare of the people in the city. Everything from waste management to electricity to safety to records, anything, right? It's about 40 different things. And to me, why this was what was really rewarding about this was understanding that there are people as cynical as we may be about government, as cynical as we may be about the state of governance. To me, this was revealing as to how many people are invested in doing good on a day-to-day basis, right? Your newspapers will never tell you that there is this 30,000 person town in North Karnataka somewhere, which has figured out an environmentally friendly way of picking up, going house to house and picking up waste without spending a rupee of expenditure, right? And ensuring it is scalable, ensuring it is sustainable, and you'll be stunned to see how this, when you sort of reach out into the system to say I want to help, you'll be surprised how many hands will come out to say yes, thank you, we want this thing, right? And for me, it's a way, like, our daily newspapers will tell you all the failures. Working with the government closely, in some ways like this, will tell you of the thing that actually literally keeps the lights on and literally keeps this thing going. And it is possible, and like in the way that it can restore your faith in broad ideas of governance, constitutionalism, and so on. You may sometimes have that success, sometimes you may not. All the challenges and all the successes that Praveen mentioned, absolutely valid. But I think what it will really do is it will help you gain a new understanding of the system of governance that we have, why it works more than it fades, and how you can get it to work better and reduce the failures.
Yeah. I think that's a message of hope for everyone who wants to make a change, right? From the view. I think it takes perseverance, but then there are rewards.
Yeah. It's possible. So which is why I want to end on that hopefully optimistic message.
Thank you both so much for coming on this webinar and giving us your time. If anybody has any more questions, maybe I'll email them to you and maybe you can answer them. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and see you on the next episode of Wildlife Chronicles.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. All the very best.
All the best. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.